The diner smelled like coffee and fried dough, the kind of place where morning and midnight met, and everyone's problems tasted a little less bitter with a plate of pancakes in front of them. The bell above the door chimed as a man in a rumpled jacket pushed through, eyeing the counter, scanning faces. Kids pressed their noses to the glass display. A waitress with tired eyes and a tray of orders moved between stools like she owned the floor and didn't bother to prove it. At a corner booth, a little boy sat hunched over a coloring book, his elbows messy with syrup and his hair still smelling faintly of wet pavement. He was small enough to swing both legs under him and big enough to keep his chin up when strangers looked at him. When the man at the door saw him, something in his face rearranged, a sneer that belonged to someone who thrived on being taller, louder, and meaner than anyone else in the room. "Move, runt," the man snapped, stepping toward the booth as if the place belonged to his mood. The boy looked up, calm and wary. His eyes were honest. They kept meeting the others as if evaluating a storm. The bully reached out and shoved the coloring book off the table. Crayons rolled like tiny soldiers scattering. People glanced over. The waitress paused with a plate halfway to a customer. There is a soft geometry to public spaces. Some people look away, some pretend not to hear. But there are always those whose senses prick at the stray injustice. A retired teacher at the end of the counter, a young couple with two good-for-this-town faces, a man nursing black coffee, who had seen more trouble than his government job suggested. "That's my book," the boy said, voice small and steady. "You want to fight?" the bully hissed. He wasn't a man you'd call imposing in a suit. His strength came from a practiced cruelty. He slapped the boy hard across the cheek, the sound a quick, ugly crack that filled the room. The little boy's head turned, his cheek burning, eyes watering, but he did not scream. He simply looked at the man as if cataloging what had happened. Silence draped over the diner for a second that felt longer than a minute. The retired teacher cleared his throat. Someone muttered. The bully laughed, the sound oily and triumphant. He leaned down and shoved harder. A voice from the corner cut through the hush, low and patient, like a promise. "You don't hit kids here." The bully looked up, brow furrowing. The man talking was not the kind you'd expect to issue warnings at bar fights. He wore a dark overcoat, hands folded over a cup of untouched coffee. There were no flashy gestures, no swagger. He didn't have to be loud. The room listened. The bully's posture twitched. He had the reflex to test authority. "Mind your business," he spat. "Who are you going to make me, old man?" The man's eyes were small, unremarkable at first glance, but when they fixed on you they felt like the bottom of a well, deep and reflecting something you couldn't quite see. A quiet settled over him, the kind that made people think twice about loud moves. "You apologize," he said, his voice even. "Now." A lip curled on the bully. He was used to commanding apologies, not giving them. He tested the man's patience, and the room braced for what might happen next. The bully shoved the man back, more out of reflex and bravado than an earnest threat. The coffee cup rocked, trembling on the saucer, but did not spill. Then the man moved like a tide, slow and inexorable. His hand found the bully's wrist and held it, not with anger, but with a sure, immovable pressure. "You let go," the bully barked, trying to yank free. His face flushed the color of regret and rum. The old man's voice dropped even lower. "You let go, or you leave in pieces the size of your pride." The bully laughed once, the sound brittle now. He pushed again, the muscles in his neck tight. The little boy watched, his breath shallow, crayons idle. The diner held its collective breath. Then, as if the room finally exhaled permission, the bully stumbled backward and hit the vinyl bench. He looked around, suddenly seeing not fans but witnesses. There were no allies. His bravado curdled into fear. He scrambled to his feet and fled the diner like a dog that had smelled thunder. He crashed through the door, the bell chiming his exit into the day. For a moment, the world felt as if a seam had mended itself. The little disruptions of the morning rearranged back into a semblance of peace. The man who had intervened stood slowly and approached the table. He reached down and straightened the coloring book, picked up a crayon the boy had dropped, and placed it gently back in the child's hand. The boy's fingers closed around it, small and sure. He looked up and smiled with a guarded gratitude. "Thank you," the boy said, voice barely above a whisper. The man sat down opposite him without asking. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy stared for a beat longer than necessary. as if the concept of strangers asking for names was something to weigh. Marcus, he said. Marcus. The man repeated, tasting the name like a private label. You a good artist? Marcus nodded. I like drawing trains. Trains, in that moment, felt like something the man understood, lines that led somewhere, machines that connected points across empty spaces. He looked toward the kitchen where the waitress worked, and then back at Marcus. You want pancakes? He offered. Marcus's eyes widened, then crinkled. Yes, please. While the waitress took his order, Marcus watched the man quietly. He noticed the way the man's knuckles were scarred, the faint silver lines that made a road map across his hands. There was a gravity to him that made the boy think of anchors and heavy doors. But there was also a softness when he talked to the waitress, an ease that softened the room. When the pancakes arrived, the man ate slowly, more to keep attention than from hunger. The kitchen hummed. Conversation returned to the booths like birds settling on electrical wires. Marcus colored between the lines, a small ocean in his crayon world. The man paid for the pancakes and left a generous tip. As he stood, his coat felt open and revealed, tucked neatly beneath, a leather wallet edged in gold stitching. The waitress's eyes flicked to it, and then away. She had seen men with money before, some who spent it like confetti, others who wore it like armor. They walked out together into a city that smelled of rain and exhaust. The man held the boy's small hand with a care that was almost reverent. They didn't say much. The man was careful, measured, like a person who had learned how to get exactly what he wanted by offering others what they needed. They reached a black car waiting in the lane outside an old brick building. The man opened the rear door and helped Marcus in. He buckled the boy in with a practiced motion, a gentleness that seemed at odds with the world people preferred to imagine him inhabiting. He leaned close and whispered, "Stay here for a minute. I'll be right back." The man stepped away and into the light like someone going to fetch truth from a shadow. He walked toward the nearest corner, where the bully had disappeared. At the curb, two men hung back by a delivery truck, chewing gum in a way that suggested they had nothing better to do. The man approached them and spoke in a tone so soft that the words felt like hidden currency. "We don't speak of my family," he said. The two men looked at him, and something like recognition passed between them, an understanding of how the city's gears turned. They mumbled something that sounded like apology and shuffled off as if steps could erase the memory of a mistake. When the man returned to the car, he told Marcus a story about trains and stations and how people sometimes missed the right car and got lost. Marcus listened, eyes wide and full of steam engine wonder. The man spoke about directions and choices, about being brave when it counted and kind when it didn't, about how small hands could hold on to big things. Later, Marcus learned that the man had a name the newspapers used in hushed lines, and that the phone the kids in the neighborhood passed around when telling tall tales had a number the city pretended not to know. People called him many things behind closed doors, and sometimes in open ones too. But for Marcus, he was the man who stood up when no one else would, the man who smelled like leather and safe pockets, and who made room for extra pancakes. Word moved through the neighborhood the way rumors always do, fast and with an appetite. The bully's friends avoided the diner for a while. The waitress got an anonymous envelope containing several weeks' wages tucked into her tip jar. The retired teacher sent Marcus a child's radio so he could listen to trains. Life in the diner settled into a softer rhythm. But the world doesn't clean itself with pancakes alone. Power, for all its shadow and shine, collects stories. People who spend their lives pulling strings wear patience like a coat and keep secrets in the seams. One afternoon, a car pulled up outside the diner that had not been there before. It was the sort of vehicle that didn't belong to casual errands, the kind that announced itself like thunder. A woman with a red scarf and a newspaper tucked under her arm stepped out and scanned the street. She hesitated before entering the diner, glancing at faces, at the man who now sat in his usual place, reading a paper. She sat opposite him with a little too much purpose for it to be coincidence. "You don't put yourself out," she said, folding the paper like she had folded years of decisions. He looked up, the paper making a small house around his eyes. "Someone had to," he replied. Her gaze softened and then sharpened, like a blade that remembered a softer use. "The city's changing," she said. "It's not the same game." He smiled, just a fraction. "Some games don't change. People do." She flipped the paper on the table, a page marked with small columns that whispered about auctions and plans. There's talk of a development down by the river, she said. They want to buy out the neighborhood. Push people out. Make room for glass towers. He watched the waitress refill her coffee and the retired teacher humming a tune to himself, and something tightened in his chest. Marcus walked in that day, coloring book in hand, having finished a shift at a nearby errand. He slid into the booth and immediately noticed the tension. What did I miss? He asked. Just grown folks talking about grown folks' problems, the man said. Marcus looked at the paper. They gonna build? He asked, voice small and serious. Seems like it, the man said. But not if it means people get pushed out of homes they love. Marcus tapped his crayons together with an anxiety that made him seem older than his years. My mom says the rent's already higher. The man's face cooled and hardened like iron left in the snow. He folded the paper carefully and slid it toward Marcus. Listen, he said. No one should be pushed out. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of intentions. The city, in its business of growth, often overlooked the quiet places where real life was lived. He started making calls then, words threaded into the tapestry of influence. People listened. Men and women in suits visited the block with measured smiles and contracts that smelled like latex and promises. The man met them in quiet rooms, in offices with shelves of law books and photographs of landscapes that had been sold twice over. He negotiated with a patience that felt like threat and a kindness that felt like order at once. Developers found themselves slowed by paperwork, by neighborhood coalitions that learned how to speak in louder tongues. Contracts that once smelled inevitable now felt fragile, like soap in hand. Weeks passed, and the city council postponed votes. The riverfront plans lost their sheen. The neighborhood breathed. Marcus's mother had her job cut back, but kept her home. The waitress got a raise. The retired teacher found a new book to recommend. Little victories accumulated like spare change, modest and precious. People started telling stories about the man who kept the diner safe. Some said he was a guardian angel. Others said he was a necessary chaos. Marcus, who had learned more about trains than headlines, simply called him the man who didn't let bullies win. Years later, Marcus grew tall and steady. He would tell the story of being slapped in a diner and how a stranger stepped in to make things right. He told it without fear of naming the man differently because names changed, but the lesson stayed. Power without compassion was just a louder voice. Power with compassion could be a bridge. The bully never came back. Whether he'd left town or learned what fear meant, nobody could say. The diner remained a patchwork of stories and stains that cleaned just enough for people to keep coming. The man, when the city called and the shadows lengthened, would sometimes vanish into the night and sometimes return with pastries that tasted like forgiveness. On nights when the bell chimed and the rain smeared the windows, Marcus would look out at the empty street and think of choices. He colored trains that carried people home, bridges that held more than weight, and stations where every traveler could find a seat. He learned that protection sometimes came wrapped in the unexpected, that courage was not the absence of fear, but its companion, and that a simple act, a standing up, a paid bill, a whispered warning, could reroute a life. Once, years later, Marcus sat across from the man again, this time in a small office with posters of trains on the wall. A kid of his own drew on a pad at his feet. The man watched them with a face like an old map. You kept drawing, he said. Marcus laughed. I did. The man took a long time to answer. Good, he said. Keep going. Outside, the city moved, indifferent and alive, and somewhere a bell chimed for a new set of people finding coffee at dawn. The memory of a slap in a diner did not vanish. It became a turning point, a hinge. Marcus knew that the world was full of complicated people wearing histories like coats, and sometimes those coats hid hands that could build or break. He also knew that every time someone made the choice to stand with the small, the world shifted, just a little, and that little often made all the diff it did.